Okay, so for the last 2 weeks, if you tuned in, you saw the outside of a chicken house. We also took you on the inside of a chicken house and kind of talked about that operation and how it functions. So today we're going to cover with the litter and the things that come out of that house, including our mortality. How do we handle that and make it environmentally friendly?
Okay, so different folks, depending on what you've got on your farm, different folks have different types of dead bird disposal systems. There's rotary drum composters, which is what you see behind Jessica and I. There's static bin composters, there's alleyway composters. There's several different ways to compost birds that you'll lose out of your chicken houses. And again, folks that grow chickens every day, they know this. Every day you've got birds on the farm, you're going to lose a few. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with that mortality, how you're going to manage it. Because again, like everything else in life, there's rules and regulations on how you can manage it, what's legal, what's not legal, how you need to take care of that. In our situation here on the poultry research farm here at Mississippi State, we have what's called a rotary drum composter. That's basically what it is. It's just a great big round drum that turns. So if you've got a composter such as this, it's on some type of a timer. It's going to turn X number of times a day. You're going to program it with this box here, and you tell it how many times you want it to turn a day, what time of day it turns. It turns very, very slow. It takes 15 minutes for this drum to make one complete circle. And in one complete circle, by the time it goes around one time, it will discharge about half of a 30-gallon trash barrel worth of compost material. If you have it set for 30 minutes and it makes 2 complete revolutions, it's going to discharge about a full 30-gallon trash barrel of material. Now, it doesn't make any difference whether you're using a rotary drum composter or a static bin composter, an alleyway composter. Composting is probably more art than it is science. There is some science behind it. You have to keep the moisture content of your material correct. You have to keep the carbon-nitrogen ratio correct. You have to keep the oxygen level correct. Again, the microbes that break down the mortality and turn it into compost, they're just like us. They breathe oxygen. They're not anaerobic, they're aerobic microbes. So they've got to have oxygen to work. If this thing is working right, and if your static bin or your alleyway composter is working right, you're going to have about 130 or 140 degree temperature in your compost mix. And that's what you want. 130, 140 degrees is hot enough to kill most of the bacteria that is in that litter. Again, it will compost at a little lower temperature than that. You know, you can have 110, 120 degrees and it will still compost. It works slower, it takes longer, but it will still compost. It will still break down, and in the end, you've got compost to work with. But again, it's easier to do if you've got the moisture level right and you've got the carbon-nitrogen ratio right. The litter Jessica talked about is how we get the carbon-nitrogen ratio right. You know, again, it's more art than it is science. You have to kind of figure out, based on how many birds you're losing, how big those birds are, how much they weigh, how much material, dead bird wise, are you putting in there. And then you have to figure out on your own how much carbon source, how much litter do I put with this amount of dead birds. Now, whenever they're small, maybe a 5-gallon bucket of baby chickens and a 5-gallon bucket of carbon source is fine. When they get bigger, as the chickens get bigger, you've got to continue to add more and more carbon source, because those chickens have a lot more water in them when they weigh 6 or 8 pounds than they did when they were a baby chicken. And because of that, you've got to put enough carbon source in there to soak up all of the water that's in those chickens. And if you don't have enough to soak up all of that water, it's not going to be an aerobic process. The litter is going to get wet, it's going to get saturated, it's going to get heavy, it's going to squeeze the oxygen out, it's going to be too wet to get a high temperature. So again, it's art. You have to play around with it a little bit and figure out what the ratio to dead birds and litter is and how to make that process work. You've got to kind of fine-tune that yourself. People can tell you about how much they think you need to be putting, but again, every farm is different. It works a little bit differently for every person. but that's the gist behind it. It takes, from the time we put birds in this end, and this is the load end, by the time it works its way all the way to the other end of that drum and comes out, it might take, depending on how many times a day you're turning your material, it might take 2 months if you've got baby chickens. It might take 2 weeks if you've got big chickens. But again, if you've got that temperature hot, if you've got 130, 140 degrees, by the time it comes out the other end, it may be 20, 25, 28% moisture. And you don't want it to get a whole lot more than that. If you've got 50% moisture when it comes out, it's too wet. It's not going to work the way you want it to. Now, compost is pretty forgiving. You can make a mistake, you can get it too wet, and most people do. If they do make a mistake, it's because they've got it too wet. You know, I've known hundreds of people that got the stuff too wet. I can count on one hand the people that got it too dry. Theoretically, you can get it too dry, and again, it won't heat, but that's not the mistake people make. The mistake that people make is not putting enough dry material in with all the dead birds that they have, and then the whole process gets too wet and slows down too much. Again, composting is a good method of dealing with mortality. This composter, like everyone else that grows commercial chickens, is registered with the Board of Animal Health at Jackson. We've got a little silver tag on this unit that tells them and us that our paperwork is on file in Jackson. Dr. Watson and the folks at the Board of Animal Health know we're here. They know where we are. Everyone else that grows commercial chickens, whether they've got a rotary drum, static bin, alleyway composter, they've got paperwork on file at Jackson, and they've got a little silver tag on their site that tells the Board of Animal Health people that they have that. And again, the Board of Animal Health can come around and inspect your unit, and they do that from time to time. So again, make sure you've got that tag, make sure you've got your paperwork in place. And again, that's pretty much how the composting process on dead bird works, but be aware, again, it's as much or more art than it is the science behind it.
So with the composting, it's kind of just like your own backyard composter where you have to make those layers and it works, and when that end result comes out, we can actually utilize that in a flower bed or fields or whatever you would like. If it's functioning properly, what Tom has always said is you shouldn't smell a composter if you're functioning correctly. So you can see us standing right here by it. We're not bothered by the smell, and you should not have an odor coming out if it's properly ratioed and working correctly.
Yep. This is our little silver tag that tells the Board of Animal Health that we're legal. They know where it is. They know if you've got it under shed. And even though this is a rotary drum composter, it still has to be under shed. You have to have a roof. You have to have a concrete slab for it to set on. So again, there's rules and regulations that you have to abide by. But like Jessica said, if it's working right and it's aerobic and not anaerobic, you don't have odor, you don't have flies, and you've got good hot, high temperature to make the process work speedily.
Sounds good. Last thing, Tom. So for those of us that don't know about commercial chickens, generally how many birds are in a house and how much mortality will you actually have out of that house?
Okay, depending on what your house size is, you know, a small house that is, let's say, 40 by 400 feet wide, you might have 16,500 chickens in that house. A house that is 50 feet wide by 500 feet long, you might have 22 to 25,000 chickens in that house. Over the life of that flock, you will generally lose anywhere from maybe 3 to 6% of the chickens that was put in that house. Again, every day you will lose some chickens. You'll lose most of those chickens whenever they're little, the first 2 weeks. After that, your mortality per house may go to single digits a day. So there will be days whenever they're small that we may be putting 25 to 30 chickens a day out of this house the first week or 10 days. By the time they get to be 3.5, 4 weeks old, and mortality has come down again, we may only put 4 or 5 chickens a day out of each house. As they get bigger and closer to market weight, that mortality may inch up a little bit, so we may be back to 10, 15, 20 birds a day to the house. And again, it's always moving. It's never the same every day, and that's part of why it's difficult to manage it correctly, because it never stays the same all the time. You have to adjust your wet to dry ratio every day, and that ratio changes every day.
So farming's not as easy as everyone thinks it is.
It's not. You know, it might look easy from the outside, but again, it's like any other job. If you're successful at it, you have to work at it.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Hail State.
Thank you.